Hi, good people. How are you? 1st of May, May Day. I guess we're headed into spring for real and summer. And I guess this is going to be an interesting stream somewhat. I want to say a few words about prominent astrophysicist. I believe that's what Dr. Hossenfelder is. Wending her way into controversial topics and getting into medicine. I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time going through Sabine Hossenfelder's entire video. I think the video starts out, for those of you who've seen it, it starts out, fairly trans-friendly. She acknowledges the fact that trans people, in fact, do exist. Would give her credit for that. And acknowledges that particularly trans kids, I was one once, there was a picture of me at the age of, I think that was maybe 12, 13, me on a horse at a summer camp where I shoveled shit out of barns for ages and ages. Acknowledges that trans kids are faced with particularly rough road to hoe, seeing as they're kids hitting puberty, maybe feeling like it's the wrong puberty, maybe just having a tough time. I was doing all of that in the late 60s, early 70s. I graduated from high school in 1971, and I was aware of my situation. If the level of understanding then had been what it has become today, without the, I guess what you'd call the social hysteria that's going around, I think I might have had a better time of it, to be honest. Certainly my life would have been different. But credit to Dr. Hossenfelder for recognizing that, yeah, it's a difficult issue. Hang on, I'm just trying to figure some stuff out here. I want to be able to see you guys in the live chat. If you're here, yeah. Silence myself so that I don't hear myself twice. That's kind of annoying. Pop out the chat. Get away from top chat. All that good stuff. Live chat. So anyway, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time focusing on the good doctor's take. But I do want to feature this one thing. And I think it's key to where she goes wrong in what she's got to say. So let me present Barnes. By the way, the title of her video is Trans a Social Fad Among Teenagers? Dr. Hossenfelder. Listen to what she has to say here. It's showtime, Sabine.
Good reason to put your child through this. Unfortunately, the evidence that puberty blockers actually improve the mental health of children presenting with gender dysphoria is slim. Some studies have found a small benefit in the reduction of suicidal tendencies, but these studies didn't have control groups, so the benefit might have come simply from receiving
Stop the
treatment
tape right
and being
there.
cared for.
Oh my
Studies have
goodness, my
found
goodness, I'm on the wrong darn window. This is a problem for me sometimes. Yeah, we'll stop the tape right there. But these studies did not have control groups. Dr. Hossenfelder applies that standard to every study she mentions, which, by the way, she also, in her video, locks the links to all the studies she references behind her Patreon paywall, so you can't. It's not easy to find this stuff she's talking about. Oh, with a little diligence, you can get around. And I don't even really want to, although I did provide actual links to some studies as regards GnRH agonists, which analogues, GnRH analogues, which I, that's what puberty blockers are. They basically interfere with the release of sex hormones and their uptake. They sort of postpone the effects of testosterone or estrogen until giving a kid time to consider things. So, she makes reference over and over again to these are experimental, they are this, that, and the other thing. Well, you could say they're experimental, except that they were introduced in the 80s. One of their uses was to delay precocious puberty for cisgender children. And so they have been in use. They've also been used to treat endometriosis in young girls. There are studies as to bone mass and all of this other stuff that have gone on. But here's the thing, the control group, when we're talking about control groups, I want to talk about a paper that was written and published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1991. Volume 324, number 22, New England Journal of Medicine. And the title of the paper is Of Mice But Not Men, The Problems of the Randomized Clinical Trial. I think it points out why it's unethical. The ethics are more than questionable for withholding therapies that are known to produce positive results when you can't do a control group. You can't do a double-blind study. First of all, let's talk about diagnostics when we're talking about issues of treating gender dysphoria. If a child, or an adult for that matter, is presenting with insistent, persistent, consistent signs of gender dysphoria, that child is thoroughly examined so that, given the nature of the possible treatments the limit on access to medical treatments, which do not take place before the age of, approaching puberty, 11, 12-ish. When things start going, I don't recall off the top of my head the Tanner stage at which they're introduced, but in any event, by that time, a candidate for that sort of thing has been evaluated very, 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 very consistently and carefully by a medical team and by a family, by the kid herself or himself or their self. It's a serious thing, given the social implications, given the medical implications, all of this stuff. And so the idea that these children, who Sabine acknowledges are real, it's a real thing. It is a phenomenon. I like to say that being trans is another way of being human. It's just different. It's not common. The latest things, 0.6% of the population will have that sort. Will have this sort of condition. But the point is, there are no alternative therapies, and the therapies that have been used over the course of the last 50 years, nearly. Well, let's just say 25 at least, through the DSM-3 to 4 to 5, through the evolution of the Harrius-Benjamin standards of care into WPATH. These practices have been shown time after time after time, and case after case after case, to have a positive impact on the people that are affected by this condition, which is, again, a part of the human condition. So how do you do a randomized double-blind study? What do? You have identified the target group. You've identified a target group of gender dysphoric, let's say, children, because this is where Sabine is focusing on. You've identified that group. You offer one group GnRH agonists or gender-affirming hormones. I mean, if you take it out of the realm of young people, generally hormones aren't introduced until 15, 16 or so. So basically what we're talking about is 2 years of the best practices. From my understanding, I am not a physician, I'm a cell maker. My understanding of best practices is 2 years of blockers, then gender-affirming hormone therapy is introduced. And the reason for the 2 years is there are known side effects from GnRH agonists. There are side effects for cis people taking GnRH agonists that have to do with mineralization. Interestingly enough, in one study, which is referred to again in the notes for this video, finds that in most cases, any bone mineral loss that occurs or that hasn't taken place does come back quicker with trans boys than trans girls, interestingly enough. And I think that has to do with the action of testosterone in bone building. But again, I'm not a physician, I don't know. But so you give one cohort GnRH agonists or gender-affirming hormone therapy, and you give the other group nothing. Now remember, the other group is part of this group. It's part of this group that is suffering, that has real conflicts and serious discomfort. And they know who they are. They've been persistent, insistent, consistent in expressing who they are, in expressing what their gender identity is. That's the group. And you give half of them a placebo and let them go through what to them is the wrong puberty. And you give the other half of the group a chance to pause and think more clearly. Does that make sense? So this paper, this 1991 paper of Mice But Not Men, points this out. As medicine has become increasingly scientific and less accepting of unsupported opinion or proof by anecdote, which is what Sabine is basically saying the medical profession has been doing over the course of the past 30 years or so. The randomized controlled clinical trial has become the standard technique for changing diagnostic or therapeutic methods. The use of this technique creates an ethical dilemma. Researchers participating in such studies are required to modify their ethical commitments to individual patients and do serious damage to the concept of the physician as a practicing, empathetic professional who is primarily concerned with each patient as an individual. Researchers using a randomized clinical trial can be described as physician scientists, a term that expresses the tension between the two roles. The physician, by entering into a relationship with an individual patient, assumes certain obligations, including the commitment always to act in the patient's best interests. As Leon Kass has rightly maintained, quote, the physician must produce unswervingly the virtues of loyalty and fidelity to his patient, end quote. Though the ethical requirements of this relationship have been modified by legal obligations to report wounds of a suspicious nature and certain infectious diseases, these obligations in no way conflict with the central ethical obligations to act in the best interests of the patient medically. Instead, certain non-medical interests of the patient are preempted by other social concerns. What could possibly be the other social concern that Sabine Sabine, Dr. Sabine, what is the social concern that Dr. Sabine has? That this cohort of people who are suffering might have access to therapies that she finds dubious on the basis of the fact that there hasn't been a randomized clinical trial, and therefore the studies that have been conducted are worthless. And I think that has something to do with what Sabine does for a living. As the paper goes on, the role of the scientist is quite different. The clinical scientist is concerned with answering questions, i.e., determining the validity of formally constructed hypotheses. Such scientific information, it is presumed, will benefit humanity in general. The clinical scientist's role has been well described by, wait for it, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Remember, this is 1991. Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, who states the goals of the randomized clinical trial in these words: "It is not to deliver therapy, it is to answer a scientific question so that the drug can be available for everybody once you've established safety and efficacy." End quote. The demands of such a study can conflict in a number of ways with a physician's duty to minister to patients. The study may create a false dichotomy in the physician's opinions. According to the premise of the randomized clinical trial, the physician may only know or not know whether a proposed course of treatment represents an improvement. No middle position is permitted. What the physician thinks, suspects, believes, or has a hunch about is assigned to the not knowing category. So we're looking for a binary. There may be binaries in physics, but there aren't in medicine. Because knowing is defined on the basis of an arbitrary but accepted statistical test performed in a randomized clinical trial. Thus, little credence is given to information gained beforehand in other ways, or to information accrued during the trial, but without the required statistical degree of assurance. What's the sigma? That was me. But without this required statistical degree of assurance that a difference is not due to chance. So it goes, there's a section of the paper that goes into the foundations of these things, whether you're a subscriber to Kant or a neo-Kantian, or a subscriber to John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. So in brief, asserting that human beings, this is the Kantian view, human beings by virtue of their unique capacity for rational thought are bearers of dignity. As such, they ought not to be treated merely as a means to an end. Rather, they must always be treated ends in themselves. Okay. Utilitarianism, by contrast, defines what is right as the greatest good for the greatest number, that is, as social utility. The morally correct act is that produces the most pleasure and the least pain overall. Right. Okay. Fair enough. A classic objection to the utilitarian position is that according to that theory, the distribution of pleasures and pains is of no moral consequence. This element of the theory severely restricts physicians from being utilitarians, or at least from following the theory's dictates. Physicians must care very deeply about the distribution of pain and pleasure, for they have entered into a relationship with one or a number of individual patients. They cannot be indifferent to whether it is these patients or others that suffer for the general benefit of society. And I'd urge you to go back and look at Those That Walk Away from Omelas, the video I did before the blow up stream on my channel. It's sort of focuses on that in a Ursula K. Le Guin sci-fi way, and I think it's significant in this discussion. They cannot be indifferent to whether it is these patients or others that suffer for the general benefit of society, even though society might gain from the suffering of a few, and even though the doctor might believe that such a benefit is worth a given patient's suffering, i.e., that utilitarianism is right in the particular case. The ethical obligation created by the covenant between doctor and patient requires the doctor to see the interests of the individual patient as primary and compelling. In essence, the doctor-patient relationships requires doctors to see their patients as bearers of rights who cannot merely be used for the greater good of humanity. As Dr. Fauci has suggested, the randomized clinical trial routinely asks physicians to sacrifice the interests of their particular patients for the sake of the study and that of the information that it will make available for the benefit of society. This practice is ethically problematic. In particular, consider the case of a disease for which there is no satisfactory therapy. For example, advanced cancer, or the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. Remember, this is 1991. Guess what Dr. Fauci is concerned about right now, right then. A new agent that promises more effectiveness is the subject of the study. The control group must be given either an unsatisfactory treatment or a placebo. Even though the therapeutic value of the new agent is unproved, if the physicians think that it has promise, are they acting in the best interests of their patients in allowing them to be randomly assigned to the control group? Are you going to take an already identified group of transgender people and offer them the opportunity to either pause and consider transition, depending on their age, or to transition, or to not transition? But basically what you're doing here, Sabine, is you're telling the control group, you, my friends, will not know, nobody will know whether they're getting effective medicine. But it's going to show up pretty goddamn soon, because if you're 12 years old and you're a trans girl, you're going to grow a beard. Your voice is going to crack. You're going to start sprouting hair all over the place. If you're a trans boy, you're going to start menstruating, you're going to grow breasts, you're going to do all of those things. And if you are one of those children, you're going to be even more immiserated. So that's the kind of true science that will make Sabine comfortable in the treatment of trans youth and in the treatment of trans people generally. Now, I'll say a word about, the people that go through this process. The regret rates are astonishingly low. %2. There are anecdotal cases, where someone will say, I was tricked into the whole thing and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out that they, when they elected for surgery, elected for surgery at 20, getting surgery in their 20s and hormones. But they didn't go through that process, which is why I think that that gatekeeping and mental health professionals need to weigh in and be deeply involved in the process. Sabine, just before she goes, she says this thing about control groups being, rigorous studies in control groups and all that business is going, let's slip another little piece of what's really kind of propaganda, in that the pharmaceutical industry is making a bundle off of this. Oh, really? You think so? I mean, GnRH agonists cost a fucking fortune. There's no question about that. But they're not making a hell of a lot of money off of 0.6% of the population. Not every member of such population even using the goddamn stuff. So that's a little bit curious. But you see where I'm going here. You know, there's no way to ethically do the kind of studies that Sabine wants. And she wants them because she's a physicist and she doesn't understand the nuance, the human nuance. You can't, that people aren't particles. People are people. Medical professionals are medical professionals. Anyway, back to that. A new agent that promises more effectiveness is the subject of the study. The control group must be either given an unsatisfactory treatment or a placebo. Even though the therapeutic value of the new agent is unproved, if physicians think that it has promise, are they acting in the best interest of their patient in allowing them to be randomly assigned to the control group? Are they? Is persisting in such an assignment consistent with the specific commitments taken on in the doctor-patient relationship? As a result of interactions with patients with AIDS and their advocates, Merrigan recently suggested modifications in the design of clinical trials that attempts to deal with the unsatisfactory treatment given to the control group. And Rebecca Pringle-Smith of Community Research Initiative in New York says, even if you have a supply of compliant martyrs, trials must have some ethical validity. The other point I'll make here from this paper, and it really is a good paper. I've read through the whole thing. I highlighted a few. Physicians can acquire knowledge through methods other than the randomized clinical trial. And in the case of trans healthcare, physicians have. I transitioned 25 years ago, started transition 25 years ago. At the time, it was the Arias Benjamin standards of care that required a 2-year real life test. The DSM-3 had transsexualism as a mental illness. A whole host of the gatekeeping was pretty severe. And even in those days, people were figuring out ways to jump around those hoops. But there's been progress. There's been a DSM-4. There's now a DSM-5 and a revision to that. And it's no longer the case. It's the diagnostic condition is gender dysphoria now, and not transsexualism. The vast majority of mainstream science has rejected such cockamamie notions as the theory of autogynephilia that Ray Blanchard put forth, which was, it's too crazy for words. Basically, there were homosexual transsexuals and autogynephiliacs. And autogynephiliacs were, by the definition of the theory, people who enjoy the idea of having sex as a woman. Well, if one is a woman, then one might enjoy that idea. Matter of fact, one of the great debunkers of the theory was, They did a survey. Turns out a whole bunch of cis women are autogynephiliacs. Unbelievable. Anyway, physicians can acquire knowledge through methods other than the randomized clinical test. Such knowledge acquired over time and less formally than is required in a randomized clinical trial may be of great value to a patient. The inability to remain blinded usually occurs in studies of cancer or AIDS, for example, because the therapy is associated by nature with serious side effects like death. Such restrictions should make physicians eschew the trial. Now, this is not an article by Jonathan Chait. This is not an article by Jesse Singal, whom Sabine refers to multiple times later on in this piece. This is an article in the New England Journal of Medicine about medical ethics. Perhaps it should have been published in New York Magazine or the New Yorker or wherever Jesse Singal hangs his shingle. Yeah. All right, fair enough. But Singal has been hammering on trans people since he's made his living off of writing shit articles about trans people since 2018 at the very least. Maybe 2016 was when his famous thing came out, when Lisa Littman published her paper on the sudden rise in children identifying as transgender, which bears some similarities to the rise in left-handedness once left-handedness was not punished. So society loosens its restrictions. Society starts taking a different attitude towards trans people who are after all just people, and suddenly more people feel comfortable acknowledging their transness. So again, this article hammers it out. The concern for the interest, the relationship between a doctor and patient partakes of a peculiar intimacy. It presupposes on the part of the physician not only knowledge of his fellow men, but sympathy. This aspect of the practice of medicine has been designated as the art. Yet I wonder whether it should not properly be called the essence. Concern for the interests of the subject must always prevail over the interests of science and society. I'm just seeing what other. And the last piece from this paper is the final sentence, which I think applies to Dr. Sabine here. Techniques appropriate to the laboratory may not be applicable to humans. We must develop and use alternative methods for acquiring clinical knowledge. So that's what I have to say to Sabine. You demand certainty. And you expect trans people to watch and wait as you, Dr. Sabine, make up your mind as whether we are worthy to live our lives. At the end of this video, she makes some outright boners. Aside from being, come on now. Gotta find you. I've lost you again, Sabine. I'm so sorry. And she goes into the left-hander argument. And it's like, I could go and debunk that, but I don't really feel like it. But her summary here is just a
sudden increase in the number of teenagers identifying as transgender is both real and substantial. It's also clear that the demographic group is markedly shifting, now heavily skewed towards those assigned female at birth, many of which present with other mental health disorders. Evidence that those children would benefit from puberty blockers or hormone therapy is slim, with large uncertainties. The side effects can be substantial, and the long-term consequences are mostly unknown.
They've been used for 20 years, more than 20 years. Where are you getting your data? Jesse Single.
Exactly what is going on, no one really knows. But the reasonable expectation is that the current increase in reports of gender dysphoria is caused by a mixture of two causes. Young people are more comfortable being openly trans, and some of them erroneously believe they are trans because they've heard so much about it. I'd say that anyone who insists that one of those possibilities doesn't exist is pushing an agenda and shouldn't be taken seriously.
The agenda is health.
How do you tell these two possibilities apart? This is
the people that are pushing the agenda on the other side are not organizing to ban healthcare or to make it more available. They're asking to be left the fuck alone to make these decisions between their physician and their family and themselves. There is no agenda. Who's got the agenda here? You guys are out there trying to pass frickin' laws in state after state, in country after country. You're doing that. We're not doing that. We're asking for medical professionals to take the lead, not journalists, not physicists. We're asking to simply be left alone to live our lives. We're not recruiting. We're not grooming. We're not saying, hey, cis people, you all ought to be trans. But you are saying, hey, trans people, you ought to be cis. Or, you can be trans, but you have to be miserable. What the fuck? What the actual scientific fuck? I've tried to take a measured tone here, but my goodness. Follow on.
Currently unclear. And this is why countries like Sweden, Finland, and the UK are asking doctors to hold back with prescriptions. Because at the moment, they don't know how to deal with the sudden surge of girls presenting with gender dysphoria, and they don't want to do any harm. So what do you think? Do you have...
I must have skipped it, but she made reference to the reason that Sweden and the UK, by the way, she makes reference to the UK. The UK is a fucking shit show. The National Health Service is very, very hard to deal with for trans people because there are enormous waits. It takes years to get an appointment with a gender clinic, and then it takes years and years and years beyond that to actually have any care provided. But the in 2021, the High Court in the UK put in a ban for GnRH, for the use of GnRH agonists, and the High Court overruled it. And Sabine makes reference to it, but doesn't make reference to the fact that the High Court overruled that law because it violated what's called Gillick competence, which is when a teenager can make medical decisions for themselves. And Gillick competence arose out of what? Contraceptives. So this to me is an example of a person with 857,000 followers reading an article by Jonathan Chait, Jesse Singal, doing a tiny bit of research, but not anywhere near enough, carrying with her a level of professional training that says that in medicine, as in physics, a double-blind clinical trial is the only thing that can establish proper praxis. And therefore, what is the consequence of that? Consequence of that are laws being passed by, I don't know, physicists, used car salesmen, accountants, mechanics, sitting in state legislatures who are willing to take away people's existing access to healthcare, access to bathrooms, access to public streets, principally focused on women. So, don't want to shit on Sabine too hard, but she's buying into this. Is an example of someone just asking questions who can't get beyond the questions that she's asking to see the consequences of her reflections on real people in real time. When you pass a law that says that if you allow your child without any medical intervention at all, social transition, if you allow your child to social transition, the state of Florida will take that child away from you. And if you are a trans parent, the state of Florida will take your children away from you, because both of those things consist of child abuse. Missouri, doing pretty much the same thing, making trans healthcare totally illegal. Fortunately, today, a judge put forward an injunction on having that law go into effect, so trans people at least will have access to medication, et cetera, and so forth, and care temporarily until a more permanent injunction can be put in place. The ACLU is working on it, et cetera, and so forth. But it's for trans people all across America, all across the world, it's a daily barrage of these laws being put into place, and that on top of the fact that, there's already stigma attached to it. Our lives are hard enough. We don't need people with huge YouTube channels with huge followings. We don't need the New York goddamn Times or the New York Magazine or, you know, major media publications demonizing us almost at least on the weekly basis. So I want to thank you all for coming and listening to me rant a little bit, and my take on Sabine's. All of the link to Sabine's video is in the notes. Links to some peer-reviewed scientific studies on specifically puberty blockers, GnRH agonists, and also how they interact, and studies about psychological satisfaction, etc., and so forth. They're in there. There are lots more. But I'm a sailmaker. I've got other things to do. I can't spend my entire life effing with this stuff. And this is what's, you know, that it's super annoying. But thanks a bunch, everybody. I guess I'm gonna just sort of leave it here. Leave some comments if you like. Love seeing everybody in the chat. I was busy reading stuff on the screen, and so I haven't been paying good enough attention. I'm seeing Logan Fisher, Jason Jacoby, Pragmatic Crystal, Lena. Hi, Lena. I'll miss everybody, so I don't know. Yeah, so thanks for coming, and sorry it was a shit topic, but see ya.